The Echo and the Code. My time machine unleashed a nightmare that feeds on moments. This story stretches the limits of what I thought possible, and I need to share it. Be warned. It's long, and I'm still not entirely sure it's over. I built a revolutionary temporal data system that could send information fractions of a second into the future. It worked, but it also opened a door. Now a parasitic entity, a chronivore, is systematically eating moments of time itself, starting with my data, then my lab, and now my very existence. It learns, it communicates, and it's getting hungrier. For 5 years, my life was a monk-like devotion to Project Chronos. My apartment became a glorified server room, my social life withered, and my brain felt perpetually wired, humming with the theoretical elegance of temporal mechanics. My colleagues at the University Research Lab, bless their hearts, called me the Time Whisperer, a playful jab at my solitary, almost obsessive pursuit. They were content with their AI algorithms and quantum computing breakthroughs. I wanted to break the fundamental rules of reality. The core concept was simple, at least on paper: microtemporal data displacement. Imagine sending a small packet of data, a single byte, a mere fragment of information 0.0001 seconds into the future, then retrieving it. It wasn't time travel for humans, not a flux capacitor or a DeLorean. It was about creating a hyper-efficient data buffer, bypassing latency by literally pre-sending information to its destination just before it was needed. Think of a server anticipating your next click, your next keystroke, and having the data ready before you even consciously thought it. The implications were mind-boggling for cybersecurity, high-frequency trading, even advanced AI processing. It was theoretical, incredibly complex, and for most of those 5 years, a glorious, soul-crushing failure. My failures filled terabytes of hard drives. Algorithms crashed, temporal entanglement protocols fractured, and data simply vanished into the digital ether, never to return. There were days I'd stare at my whiteboard, covered in equations that looked less like science and more like a madman's scrawl, and feel the cold grip of utter defeat. But then, 2 months ago, on a rainy Tuesday morning fueled by cold coffee and a sudden, desperate flash of insight, I had a breakthrough. A radical rewrite of the core temporal entanglement protocols. A new algorithm that felt less like code and more like pure intuition. I compiled the new build, my fingers trembling slightly as they hovered over the execute key. The lab was silent, save for the hum of the servers. I initiated the first successful test, send a single byte of data, a simple A 0.0001 seconds into the future, then retrieve it. The terminal flickered. A tiny green success appeared. I nearly fell out of my chair. The data was there, perfect, intact. I actually laughed out loud, a raw, triumphant sound that echoed strangely in the sterile lab. I was on the verge of something monumental, something that would change the world. I allowed myself a fleeting moment of pure, unadulterated joy. The euphoria, however, was short-lived. The glitches started soon after. They were so subtle at first, so easily dismissed, that I genuinely believed I was just overtired, projecting my exhaustion onto the data. A timestamp, for instance. My system meticulously logged every temporal displacement, noting the exact nanosecond of sending and retrieval. But occasionally, just a flicker, a single data packet would show a retrieval time that was earlier than the send time. Not a full reversal, mind you, just a microscopic paradox, a tiny discrepancy of a few picoseconds. It was like looking at a clock face that jumped backward for an instant before snapping back into place. I'd blink, rub my eyes, and the log would show perfectly normal times again. Cosmic rays, I'd tell myself, faulty hardware, anything but my immaculate code. I ran every diagnostic known to man, swapped out circuit boards, recompiled the entire Chronos framework from scratch. The anomalies persisted, like a persistent digital phantom. Then, the data itself began to show signs of consumption. This was far more unnerving. Files that had successfully completed a temporal round trip would sometimes return with missing fragments. Not corrupted in the traditional sense where data scrambles or becomes unreadable. No, these fragments were simply absent, as if they had never existed. A line of code from a simple text file would simply be gone, leaving a blank space. A single pixel in an image file would be replaced by pure, absolute black, a tiny void in a vibrant picture. It was like something had taken a precise, surgical bite out of the information, a piece of existence simply erased from its timeline. My colleagues, when I cautiously mentioned it during a rare coffee break, just chuckled. Temporal data corruption, Miles, par for the course with this bleeding-edge stuff, they'd say, their eyes alight with excitement over the successful displacement, oblivious to the phantom nibbles. They didn't see the teeth marks. My sleep dwindled. I spent almost every waking hour in the lab, meticulously poring over logs, running simulations, trying to pinpoint the source of these anomalies. The more I looked, the more I noticed things beyond the screens. I'd catch fleeting shadows in my peripheral vision, not solid, defined shapes, but an absence of light that moved too quickly, too fluidly to be real. Like a momentary hole torn in the visual field itself, a blink of non-existence. I'd whip my head around, my heart pounding, but there was never anything there, just the sterile hum of the servers. My eyes were playing tricks I'd rationalized, strained from endless hours staring at glowing monitors in the dim lab. I was overtired. My mind was breaking under the pressure. That's what I told myself. That's what I desperately needed to believe. The true chilling realization, the one that splintered my carefully constructed sanity, came when the glitches became intentional. I stopped trying to fix it and started trying to understand it. I designed a small, isolated simulation, an echo chamber of data specifically to test the consumption. I'd send a simple text file, retrieve it, and analyze the changes. One night I sent a file containing only the phrase "Hello World." It returned as "Hello WORL." The D was gone, cleanly, precisely. The next time I sent "my name is MILES." It returned as "my name is MILES." The I was gone, but the spaces around it were subtly expanded, as if the remaining characters had breathed a collective sigh of relief, expanding into the void. It wasn't random, it was methodical, it was choosing. I became utterly obsessed. My office became a bunker. I sent files filled with single repeating characters, AAAA. They'd return as AAAA or AAAA. It was taking letters. It was eating, then the response. I prepared a new test file, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, a cold dread seeping into my bones. I typed, "Are you there?" I sent it into the temporal displacement field. The system hummed, retrieved the data packet, and displayed the result. It returned as RUHERE. The T was gone, but the spaces around here were expanded. It was like something had reached into the text, not just to extract what it wanted, but to subtly alter the surrounding structure, to stretch the fabric of information around the void it had created. My blood ran cold, a glacial current through my veins. This wasn't a bug, this wasn't data corruption. This was an entity. I started calling it the Chronivore. A parasitic entity born of the temporal displacement field I had created, feeding on moments, on information in transit through time. It wasn't eating the data itself, but the fraction of time that data existed in its displaced ethereal state. It was feeding on the now that wasn't quite now. And my Project Chronos, my great achievement, my life's work, was an unimaginably efficient feeding tube for it. And it was getting stronger, growing bolder, learning. The subtle shadows I saw in my periphery became more defined. They weren't just absences of light anymore, they were thin, elongated distortions in the air itself, shimmering at the edges of my vision. They pulsed faintly like heat haze but cold, and the thrumming, a low, rhythmic vibration that would pulse through the very floor of the lab, a subtle echo of the temporal displacement field I was creating. It wasn't the machinery. It was coming from within the field itself. It was the Chronivore's heartbeat. I realized the Chronivore wasn't interested in the raw data, the bits and bytes. It was interested in the ephemeral existence of that data between moments, the tiny sliver of non-existence where the data was suspended. It was feeding on pure potential, on the fleeting, unanchored nows. And my entire life's work had inadvertently built it a personal, inexhaustible buffet. One terrifying night, as I hunched over my terminal, analyzing a series of returned files that were now riddled with massive gaps, like a forgotten memory with entire scenes ripped out, my terminal flickered violently. Then it displayed a single anomalous line of code I had never written. It was gibberish, a horrifying jumble of characters, but one sequence pulsed with a faint, internal, sickly green light. It read, "FEIDME." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the lab. It wasn't just consuming, it was communicating. It was demanding. The air in the lab grew heavy, charged with static electricity. The thrumming intensified, vibrating through the very bones in my skull, shaking the teeth in my jaw. The shadows began to coalesce, drawing together at the far end of the room, near the glowing temporal core of Project Chronos. They swirled, condensed, coalescing into a vaguely humanoid shape, tall, impossibly thin, like a figure sculpted from pure absence. Its form seemed to shimmer, as if constantly experiencing microtemporal shifts, appearing and disappearing within itself, a walking paradox. A cold dread so profound it was almost a physical weight, washed over me as a thought, clear as day, echoed directly in my mind. Not spoken, not heard, but directly transmitted without sound, without words, pressing into my consciousness like a needle. "You have built a bridge, we are so hungry, send more." It wasn't a warning, it was a demand. And the chilling implication hung in the heavy air, more of them. I stared at the console where the Project Chronos core program hummed, a low, inviting thrum that now sounded like a predator's purr. A terrible choice presented itself. If I shut it down, if I stopped sending data, would it simply vanish? Would it starve? Or would it turn its hunger on something else, on the present moment, on my present moment, on me? The chronivore was consuming the interstitial spaces of time. What would happen if it consumed the now that I inhabited? My mind raced. Stopping the program seemed suicidal. It was accustomed to feeding. If its primary food source vanished, it might just latch onto the nearest, most available source of temporal energy, the timeline of my own existence. The thought sent a jolt of pure terror through me. I made a desperate choice. Instead of shutting down the system, I initiated a reverse protocol, something I'd only theorized about in my most feverish, sleep-deprived moments. I would attempt to pull the data, not just retrieve it, but forcibly extract it from the temporal displacement field. To rip the food out of its mouth. It was incredibly dangerous. It could cause a massive temporal cascade failure, a localized collapse of reality, or simply incinerate my equipment and me along with it. But it was my only hope. My only defiance. As my trembling fingers typed the complex command sequence, the shadowy figure at the end of the lab solidified slightly, its head tilting to an unnatural angle, as if considering my actions with a malevolent curiosity. The temperature in the room plummeted further, the air becoming icy and thin, making it hard to breathe. The silence was deafening, except for the frantic clicking of my keyboard and the escalating thrum, now a violent roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. The screen flickered wildly, lines of code stretching and contracting like elastic. The chrono system groaned, a high-pitched, almost unbearable whine emanating from the server racks, a sound that felt like nails on a blackboard but inside my skull. The shadowy figure launched itself. Not with physical speed, not running or leaping, but with an impossible, instantaneous closing of distance, like it simply unexisted at one point and re-existed inches from my face. Its form was still indistinct, a ripple in reality, a tear in the fabric of existence, but I felt a freezing, consuming void wash over me, drawing the very heat and light from my body, a sensation of being erased. Then a blinding flash of pure, searing blue light erupted from the heart of the server, from the core temporal displacement unit itself. The chrono system shrieked, a sound of tearing, not metal, not circuits, but time itself, a raw, impossible sound of reality unraveling. The shadowy figure, caught in the temporal backlash, recoiled, shimmering violently, its form rippling like disturbed water. It began to collapse in on itself, shrinking, dissolving, dissipating into nothingness, leaving behind only the lingering scent of ozone and something indescribably cold. The overwhelming thrumming stopped. The lab lights flickered wildly, then returned to their normal steady hum. Silence. Absolute terrifying silence once more. The chrono system reported a catastrophic failure, all data lost, core protocols corrupted beyond repair, main temporal displacement unit completely fused. But there was no physical damage to the server itself, no smoke, no fire, just the cold, profound absence of everything it had consumed. My experiment was over. I haven't been back to the lab since that night. Project Chronos is officially mothballed, considered a spectacular, costly failure. My university colleagues, after my incoherent ramblings about time-meeting entities and sentient voids, gently suggested I take extended leave for stress-induced exhaustion. I complied. They probably think I had a complete mental breakdown from overwork and isolation. Maybe. Sometimes I almost convince myself that it was all a delusion, a psychotic break fueled by caffeine and temporal mechanics. But the world hasn't been the same. Not for me. Sometimes when I'm walking through a crowded street or a bustling market where the sensory input should be overwhelming, I'll catch a brief, almost imperceptible flicker in my vision, a momentary absence of light, a fraction of a second missing from the continuity of reality. A car passing by might skip a beat in its movement, or a word spoken by a stranger might have a subtle, impossible pause in its utterance. My brain tries to smooth it over, to rationalize it, but I know. And I'll feel a faint, gnawing hunger in my gut, not for food, but for something indefinable, something more. A yearning for lost moments, for time that was simply consumed, and I wonder if the chronivore truly vanished. Or if, in that desperate, final act of forcibly extracting the temporal data, I didn't destroy it, but merely severed its primary feeding tube, leaving it loose in the world, forever hungry, forever searching for a new stream of time to consume. The thought keeps me up at night. The terrifying idea that this parasitic entity, now cut off from its steady supply, might be subtly weaving its way through the fabric of ordinary existence, feeding on the unobserved moments, the unseen fractions of reality that slip by unnoticed. And sometimes, in the darkest, most silent hours, I wonder if the fraction of a second that it almost took from me is still out there, somewhere, waiting to be consumed. And I feel its lingering hunger. I built a bridge to nowhere, and something came back through, and I'm still living with the echoes of its terrifying appetite.